theory, we're live. So, folks, just a quick good morning. Let me know how you guys are hearing audio, video. There's some weird stuff I've had to do to monkey with it to make it so it didn't look like it was a badly dubbed film where mouth is moving and then audio comes much later. But hopefully I've got it as close to correct as I can. But yeah, good morning to those of you who are here nice and early. It's dang near July. Time feels like it's really flying, and that sucks in the sense of getting stuff done when Human Malware is basically like shut my state down for the most part. I mean, it's starting to open some things up. Obviously, like I was finally able to get a haircut and stop looking like a discount Doc Brown, but yeah, it's the ability to not gather in a small gathering with people really is surprisingly hampering to a lot of the things that I do. And that includes on a like professional level, like trying to go meet with friends who I'm either helping them with business things or they are helping me. God, does it suck? It sucks so much. But let's get past that. Let's talk a little bit and let some folks show up, and then we'll dive into like Q&A and all the other things. So I snuck out to the aquarium co-op, and I say sneak out, like technically pet stores are considered essential, but in Washington State right now they want you to limit non-essential travel, and there are various stores far closer to me than the aquarium co-op. The aquarium co-op is, well, now with no traffic, about a 40-minute drive. With traffic, it's like an hour and 15. And that's all basically all freeway too, because I live relatively close to the freeway, so I can get on the freeway, and they're pretty close to being off the freeway. So that's fun. So like technically, essential travel would limit me. I should be going to my local pet store, which is a nice little place called Sierra Fish and Pets, which is 10 minutes down the road, basically. Well, I went to the co-op because there was some specific stuff I wanted, and more importantly, I sat and talked with the manager, Robert, after hours. So lately, the few times I've had to go to the co-op, I actually time it so that I get there, because I know exactly what I need. So I get there about like 10 minutes before they're going to close. I get the stuff I need, and then Robert will like do his closing stuff, and then we'll just sit and BS for a little while. You know, we'll just talk, because we're good buddies. We like to talk pretty regularly, and we'll talk via Facebook too. But we much prefer like getting in person. And it's kind of funny, like, you know, we're standing outside the store. There's no one really around. We're both wearing masks. Which at some point I should show you guys my mask, but it's out in my car. And you know, we're doing our social distancing, so we're sitting like way far apart, and because we have masks and all that, we have to talk way louder. Thank goodness there's really nobody around. You just got these two fish nerds screaming at each other from, you know, like 6-7 feet apart from each other. It's kind of silly. But I want to see. I'm just gonna I want to pay attention to just chat, just kind of an initial reaction. So I was talking to Robert, and I had this video idea, and that is, you know, Robert has managed the aquarium co-op for quite a while, and he does pretty much everything for the store. You know, Corey has so much he has to do that he puts a lot into the hands of Robert. And so I sat there and was like, hey, would you be cool with like kind of an interview style video? Let's talk about like some of the things that people don't know, the challenges of running a fish store. And this is not like, don't expect to be like the dirt on aquarium co-op. Definitely not what this is. Although you might get some kind of behind the scene peeks of things that Robert has to do in order to, like, you know, have the co-op stay that really nice looking, great store that's always well stocked, except when a global pandemic shuts down importing of fish, and all that stuff. And even then, they're pretty well stocked, which is surprising. But I just kind of, as a video in my head, because there's been a kind of a rash of people in, I would say, the last 2 years who have been starting YouTube or getting pretty interested in YouTube, or maybe they just participate a lot in the YouTube audience and have thought, like, I kind of want to open my own local fish store because they don't have one, or maybe they the only thing they have is a Petco, or maybe they don't even have a Petco anywhere nearby, and you're in a medium-sized town or something like that where you can't do it in like a population of like 500 people, let's be honest. But if you've got like 20,000 people that live where you live, there's a good chance you could make a fish store work, in theory. But I don't know that a lot of those people understand, like, the hard parts of running a fish store. And, like, it might sound boring, but things like understanding your stock and understanding your audience and realizing that if you're a store that sells a ton of plants and like nano aquariums type stuff, you probably don't want to be carrying like South American cichlids because they get too big. Dwarf cichlids are fine, your epistochromas and all that stuff, but little things like that. There's some other challenges out there that I don't know that ever get talked about, and it was kind of one of those things where I talked to Robert, and Robert was really on board with it. So I'd love to know if you guys are interested in actually seeing that, because if it's one of those things where people aren't really interested, I'll put a poll up too. This will go up on the community tab. There will be a poll, so it'll be more than just you guys. But I thought I would share while we kind of like let people show up in the morning and stuff. I don't know. I thought it would be interesting, so we'll see. I'll put it up. Plus, I think Robert's just a cool dude. He's fun to just talk to, and the guy legitimately loves fish, so that's fun. All right, so that's kind of like a peek into me sneaking out to. It won't necessarily be like the Petco Stories video, although I'm sure we could do some horror stories of working at the co-op. I bet Robert would be down for that too, and it'd probably be more like weird customer interactions. I'd have to like something like that. I would have to, as a personal reason, I would want to talk to Corey and just be like, hey, do you mind if we share some customer interaction type stories? Because he might not want that kind of stuff to go out, just because he's generally a good guy, and might not want to potentially like say bad things about customers that have come into his store. And I would respect that if that was the case, but I'm pretty sure Robert would be interested because he tells me some fun stories pretty often. So there's that, and then I guess, is there anything really interesting? The final JCMP video will be coming pretty soon. I have to like shoot the last of that this weekend, as well as do its editing, and then the Zis versus Brightwater Series X media is getting close to done. There has been a fun, how do I put this? A fun tampering of my results that occurred, which I don't want to spoil that because I want it for the video because it's kind of funny. But you can probably guess that it involves a certain puppy. So I kind of had to start over. It sucked. Anyway, and then I want one thing that I will note, like, I know a lot of some of the channels, like I think a month and a half ago, started talking about using the smart plugs, and you'll forgive me as I'm pulling one out just to demo, because when I can have things in my hand, I like to do so. I've been doing some random testing using these ones, which these are the ones that, I forget the small company, they're owned by TP-Link, the Casa Smarts. So these guys here. And there's their power button over here. I've done some testing. So like an example would be the Flex's light behind me is on one of these Wi-Fi timers. And if you don't have something as effective as a Fluval 3.0, I really like these things, and I think for their cost, they can make a budget light much better, if that makes sense. So I'll probably talk about that. I don't know if I'm going to do a full video on those, just because a lot of people have done them so far, and I don't think it's necessary for me to do it. But I will be talking about these in the end of the JCMP video, because I've been using it on my JCMP light downstairs. And yeah, results are much better. So there's a specific setting that I've been using on that light that I kind of had to tinker a little with to get to, because I tried it a couple different ways for a little bit of time, and just kind of looked at like the color of my fish and how plants were doing. Found kind of what I consider my golden setup, and it's been doing very, very well. So I'll share that setting for those that end up trying the JCMP light, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's the only thing I haven't done is I haven't tried a dimmer, because like Steven is mentioning that, like the night crew timer dimmer. I don't care how to put this. If I can't control each individual color band, I don't necessarily care about the sunrise sunset. The quick on off like really doesn't spook fish that much. Most of them at night are kind of like hiding away, and a lot of times like I set my lights to come on after natural sunlight starts showing up anyway. So like this room is bright before these lights ever come on. So it's just kind of them going to proper power as opposed to no light to some light. Yeah. So there's a question from Herp Diversity about stocking ideas for a 1,500 gallon pond, planting native shiners and koi. Are there any aquarium fish that can live in a pond over winter? Yes. So like all the rice fish actually do really well over winter. They can handle quite a lot. The big thing is how deep your pond is, so that it doesn't freeze. And if you have enough movement to prevent it icing over on the top. So if you have enough pump flow so that the top has enough movement to not freeze over the top, because you really never want a pond to freeze over the top if you can stop it. But like Corey, as an example, had rice fish out and had the entire top of his little outdoor stocking totes freeze. And the whole colony underneath the ice was fine. Just, you only have so much oxygen for so long, but the cold helps reduce all their biorhythm kind of stuff, so they don't really need as much. But just some precautions there. The only thing that I would worry about is that a lot of the other aquarium fish that can survive, because like even white cloud minnows should be fine, because white clouds come from like cold mountain streams where it gets very cold. And there's several other like native river species that stay in cold water that should be fine. I would be worried that the koi would eventually get big enough to eat those small fish. That would be my concern. I don't think the shiners would, but you might have issues with the koi. And rice fish could be pretty much anyone, but I would just look at like the more standard, like the orange rice fish, the daisies rice fish, the white rice fish, the medaka. Those are all really good at handling cold water. Some of the newer ones that are starting to show up in the hobby, like there's the red cap rice fish. I have a feeling, due to what it takes them to line breed those colors, that they might not be as durable in cold weather. But I can't prove that because they're just showing up, so no one's really put them out in a pond in winter and found out, I'm sure some of the companies that have bred them know, but most of them are probably out in like Thailand or something like that, where they're just constantly in like the 70s and they don't care. So I hope that helps answer the question. Like, honestly, I would just put a lot of shiners and a lot of, You could also, now that I think about it, you might be able to do some of the darters too, because darters can take really cold water if you can find them. It's like rainbow darters, for example, are just beautiful fish, and they're a stream system fish that lives in cold water when it comes to winter, because you'll find them in like Missouri and stuff like that where it gets fairly cold. So you might look into darters would be the other thing. That's another type of native fish that occasionally comes into the hobby too, other than shiners. That they're not terribly expensive. They're really cool looking. There's several different color forms. They all come from different regions within the United States, and I think some are in Mexico, but most of them are in the United States and I think parts of Canada. Really, really neat little native fish, and also can handle the cold, can handle a pond environment. I've seen ponds before that have koi and lots of darters in them, and they're really, really pretty. Where would I get some of those fish in the thumbnail? So that's the Chilatharina aleni wapoga. There's a couple different Chilatharina alenis. There's the wapoga and the sirawu are the most common, and those are just their catch locations. The wapoga has more blue and yellow. The sirawu has more of like a orangey red tone to it, and a little less blue. Where you would find those, typically, because they're not really prevalent at like the farms and stuff yet, you're going to be looking into aquabid is your best bet. I have a small group. I want to breed them relatively soon, but I need to have time and space. That's so it comes out. That's been like my problem for the last like year, is that in order to breed rainbows, I need time and space. But I did go out and pick up some better brine hatching solutions so that I can more reliably hatch brine than the way that I used to. The way that I used to just took more time. So I'm trying to force myself to constantly have brine around, and if I constantly have live brine going, I'm more inclined to make good on certain fish giving me mops full of eggs and turning those into tanks full of babies. I do have a shrimp tank that doesn't have a lot of snails in it that might stand a chance with eggs. The biggest problem is like the snails get to the eggs so fast in most of my other tanks. So rainbow darters are really cool. Like, if Rose Aquatics is selling rainbow darters, by all means check them out, because rainbow darters are freaking sweet. And there's a couple other darters that are really cool, but I personally like the rainbow darters the most. I think they're the most pretty. Also, they have the name rainbow in them, and I'm a rainbow nerd, so. But they tend to have the most color. There are some that have more uniform color than the rainbow darter, so if you wanted like specific color choices, there's some other regional darters you could look at. But I think rainbow darters are a fish that a lot of people don't give enough love to. Like, they should be kept more. And for some people, as long as their state game wardens allow it, they can just go get them. Ooh, banded darters. That's another good one. Okay. Let me get to a couple other questions. I don't want to like skip too many babbling about like rice fish and darters, even though I love them. So Mike Stambaugh had a like massive seam leak on one of his tanks. I don't know, for those who are friends of his on Facebook, you would have seen it. And the water was just pouring out of this poor tank. And surprisingly, out of all that, only one casualty. And it was a rainbow that jumped out of the bucket using to move them. I'm sorry for the casualty, but if you only had one casualty given that seam leak, that's pretty lucky. I just imagine cleaning up that seam leak was a nightmare, because there's a lot of water. It was a pretty big tank. Bummer. Alright, let me see here. So, another question from Steven is, have you ever kept forktail rainbows? So, you're talking about the Fricata pseudomcgill, right? And any tips on keeping them? So, I personally don't keep any of the pseudomcgills. And let me explain why. I like the big rainbows. I like pseudomcgills, but I've realized that I just, with the amount of space I have, I either kind of have to dedicate myself to the big guys, so the Melantaenia, the Glossolepis, and the Chilatharinas, or I would need to dedicate myself to the little guys. And I already have so many of the big ones that I kind of just can't justify space for pseudomcgills and try to, because they're have such a shorter lifespan, you really need to be really active about breeding them. Where like big rainbows live quite a bit longer, so if you slack for a year or two, it's okay because you can get them going, when they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and they'll still breed just fine. Like I've a friend of mine who has Blaheri. His like main alpha male is like 9 years old. He's huge, and he's still like chasing all the girls in his tank all the time, and like they have eggs constantly, and it's just a matter of whether he decides to pull the plants where they lay their eggs and raise them or not. This is the same person who has like a million Series Creek rads, and I'm super jealous of him. He breeds them quite constantly. So there's that. Now, tips on keeping them. I can give you some basics. Number one, they're even more jumpy than the big rainbows, so you really want a lid on your tank. Just pseudomcgills, they're really jumpy. All of them in general. They like flow because they come from stream systems, and they tend to do best, much like normal rainbows, where at least 1-to-1 male to female, preferably one male for every 2 females if you want to see the best color and behavior and all that kind of stuff. They only last like 2 to 3 years typically. I mean, they're pretty short-lived fish, but they will spawn every single day, so you can readily breed them pretty easily. They run into some of the same problems as normal rainbows when it comes to breeding, in that their eggs fungus very easily, but unlike big rainbows, their fry hatch out quite a bit larger, so you can start them on baby brine shrimp right away, like as soon as they hatch. So you don't have to be quite as delicate like you do with the big rainbows, where you really need to have like green water or infusoria or some super micro food, and get them to 2 weeks to a month old before they can start eating brine shrimp. So there's some benefits there. The only other major benefit I would say is that you can keep Furcata rainbows in something as small as a flex like this, where you could never keep Bozemanii in that. You could keep young 2 or 3, and then very soon you would need to move them to something bigger because they really do need that room. Where the pseudomcgills, they only get so big, so smaller tanks are good for them. 20 longs are amazing for pseudomcgills, to be honest, because they have that running room, but they're also not a very big tank in general, and it's a super common tank size, so it's easy to get lids and all that kind of stuff for them. I mean, that's really it. They do like slightly harder water, not like hard, but just like if you live in the kind of water I do here in Seattle, put a little crushed coral in there, and you're good to go. Like they're super simple. They like about 74 to 78 as their temp range. I would target like 76 personally, just because it's the right kind of temperature, and also good for plants. And again, just like a big rainbow fish, they do fantastic in planted tanks. So that's like a million things to know about those fish. And yeah, they're gonna hang out by the spray bar because they like that flow. Like pseudomcgills love flow. Even the threadfin rainbows do like a little bit of flow. Not a lot compared to some of the other pseudos, but like the Gertrudae and Luminatus, Furcata, all those pseudomcgills, they come from higher flow regions, so they'll sit in flow quite a lot. Quite a lot. All right, let's see here. I think there was another question that was pretty good. From Mr. Littles. So earlier this week, I received some 1-inch Melantania bosemani Lake Atinjo from All Oddball Aquatics. Ooh, that's like probably the 3rd best person in the United States to buy from. I have a brine shrimp setup coming from the co-op. Any suggestions on raising them? So here's the thing with bosemani. Get them in like a 40 breeder. And even though they're only an inch, the reason why I say this is like bosemani naturally grow really slow after they hit the inch mark. So like rainbows can hit an inch in 2 to 3 months. But then they grind to a halt, especially bosemani, as far as the speed at which they grow. You can get them to about the 2.5 inch range in a year if you're feeding them, constantly giving them live brine, and pretty healthy feedings at that, so that there's plenty of food to go around. Make sure you've got dark substrate, dark out the back of your tank somehow. That's going to help them bring out their best color earlier. The brine will also do that. Don't forget to, like, give them a little bit of flake as kind of a staple, so they're not getting just only brine shrimp. And when they start getting, I would say, like, toward 2 inches, if you have live Daphnia is amazing. If you don't have live Daphnia, like frozen Daphnia once a week or so is also really, really good. It's just a slightly different thing to go into their diet. It's going to give them a little bit extra oomph, so to speak. It's a little bit more like calcium and things like that, technically, that are in that food that are just going to be good for them long term. Beyond that, like, I would keep a Tinjos at about 76 to 78 degrees at that size. That way you're not going too hot on them. And you want room. Because if you give them more room, like a 40 breeder, for example, they will grow faster. If you keep them in a 20 long, which you can keep Bozemanai in a 20 long until they're like 3 inches. You could. I would personally not suggest it, but you could. They won't grow as fast. You can get them to color up faster and get to that, like, good rainbow size where they're closer to that 2.5, 3 inch mark, where they look like miniature rainbows, more properly miniature adult rainbows, and they get that nice young adult coloration much faster in something like a 40 breeder, because they have a lot more room to swim. And when they have more room to swim, they're going to be more active, and when they're more active, they will generally grow faster. It's one of those things where, like, the bigger the body of the water, they just are happier and grow better. They have better, healthier appetites, blah, 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 blah. You can go down a list of things that generally rainbow fish are happier. They like room. And depending on how many you got, which if you got them from Eric, I would guess you got somewhere between like 6 and 10. Which, for those who don't know, on Aquabid, all Oddball Aquatics is Eric Bodrock. That guy is a wizard. He's phenomenally good at Corydoras, rainbow fish, and plecos. And if you're looking for one of those three and he's selling them, that's the guy to buy them from. He's one of the best in the United States at all of those things. Most of his, like, broodstock, for example, when it comes to rainbows, they're either from Gary Lang or they're from Jans George Evers out in Europe. Basically, all the people that Gary Lang gets together when he goes on his wild collecting trips are the people that Eric Bodrock gets his fish from. So, he's getting the good stuff. And just in general, he's a very, very respected rainbow guy. And so if you talk to most rainbow nerds, Eric Bodrock's on the list of, like, one of the people to go to. It's a really good person to get fish from. But yeah, I mean, that's about it, really. Bozeman are very simple. I mean, they follow the ancient rule of rainbow, which is that they'll eat kind of anything. They slowly breed, they slowly grow, but at that size, they'll start breeding once they hit 1.5 inches. So you could put mops in with them, especially as soon as you start seeing early color in the boys. You could put mops in with them, and they'll start breeding right away. So yeah, just be prepared. You could put mops in and get them used to mops and get them breeding if you wanted to. They're at a size where they're going to start throwing eggs. If you wait till they're like 2.5 inches, you'll get slightly bigger eggs, and they're a little easier to manage. They'll be a little less fragile when they hatch. But really, the difference is negligible. Once you get down like how to hatch and raise rainbows, it's pretty easy. You have the first 2 weeks are the hardest, where the fry are the most fragile, and you're most likely to have losses. And then after that, it's pretty clean skating. So yeah, you should shoot me in like a month, once they've really settled in and they're really happy. Oh, if they're already sparring, then you're probably fine. You should shoot me a picture of those. Like, shoot me an email. I want to see how colored up Eric's fish are at his ship size for that particular species. Because I saw him selling some on Aquabid like 2 weeks ago, and I sat looking at it, and I'm like, do I need more Tenjo Bozemanai? Do I need to, like, increase my stock just in case? maybe. my answer became no. I don't even have enough space for raising stuff now. I can't justify buying more fish. That would be bad. It'd be very bad. Even though I did buy some fish recently, but that's for different reasons. Okay, so I want to make sure I didn't miss another question, but other than that, I will get to Vafa's question there. Oh yeah, man. Okay, I assume that this is a fish name, Turritopsis dornii. I'm curious what that is now. Are bloodworms a good addition for rainbow diets? So, rainbows like bloodworms a lot. But I would argue that bloodworms are like giving your fish a treat and not necessarily something super nutritionally beneficial. For heavy carnivores, I would say it's not, they're not horrible. So like I fed primarily bloodworms to my zebra plecos when I had them, and they did very well on those. In the case of rainbows, they tend to eat a lot of, in the wild that is, they tend to eat a lot of like microcrustaceans and see like things like your Daphnia and your Cyclops, like those type of creatures. They eat a lot of those naturally, and bugs. So they're used to something slightly different, and it just in general that's what's going to be better for them. But it's definitely not a bad thing to like, I want to give a little bit of frozen bloodworms to my rainbows on Saturdays or something like that. Perfectly fine. Like, you are not going to hurt them giving them bloodworms. I just wouldn't look at that as a staple food. I would look at that as like a treat food. So it'd be like that thing that I would feed maybe once a week. Instead of like brine, baby brine shrimp or live brine and live Daphnia, you could feed those daily and they do fantastic. So yeah, that's how I would look at that. Turritopsis. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm assuming that's a fish. Like, let me know in chat what that is, if there's a common name for that, because I'm very curious. Oh yeah. Clint's Aqua Tanks, what's up? A member, nonetheless, with the blue shrimp badge. This has been here for a little bit. Okay. So Vafa got 12 Bozeman rainbows. They're about 1.5 to 2 inches, almost entirely silver. When can I expect them to color up with good care? Okay, here's the fun part. This will depend entirely on where the fish came from, what their brood stock is. So if they're like a farm-raised Florida fish, it might take 3 more months, 4 more months. If they're one of the good lines that a smaller farm has gotten a hold of, not too much longer. In general, the way that you get rainbows to color faster is you put them dark background at a minimum. If you can, darken the sides of the tank too, and a dark substrate. So not sand. You want like Fluval Stratum, Echo Complete, any of those like brown black tone type substrates, and plants. Because the plants act as spawning ground to them, it gives them spawning territory where they would normally like scatter their eggs and let them stick, and in theory they'll be sheltered there. And rainbows realize that that's a good place to put their eggs, but they're too dumb to realize to then leave the eggs alone sometimes, because rainbows aren't the brightest fish in the world. They're very pretty, but they're not that bright. But having those combinations of things and then having good food, so like if you do live brine and have that available, a food that's good for like small baby fish, the males are naturally going to let that color really come out so that they can try and court females, because hey, something triggers in that little brain of theirs that like there's all sorts of food around. It might be a good time to make baby fish. And I better be looking real classy. I better put on the suit and look fancy, because otherwise I'm not attracting any females. That's generally what it is. Like, I have seen pond-raised fish take up to a year to get their initial color in. and it sucks. Which is part of why there are some folks that I know who are doing their damnedest to get the stock in some of those pond breeders changed, because they've muddled a lot of the genetics so badly that they just kind of have gotten horrible, where there's so many good rainbows and rainbow breeders, like guys like Gary Lang that have brought tons of stuff in and bred them and moved them and have worked with a few farms to try and get them out more, that we can do better. So that's kind of the thing. It's hard to tell. Like, you can power feed rainbows to the 1.5 to 2 inch size, even Bozemanii, within like 3 to 4 months, and not get them to color up. My first batch of rainbows took about 6 months. The first that I bred of Bozemanii took about 6 months to get color in them, and I know that the base stock was not that great. They were a good like Ayumara rainbow, but those rainbows are the biggest of all the Bozemanii. They live the longest, and they are the slowest when it comes to coloring up and growing. So it kind of depends on what their catch location is, or whether they're a mixed Bozemanii or a specific catch location, and a few other things. Some of the smaller Bozemanii, like Atinjos, Ooters, and Chromsas, because they're smaller, they don't live quite as long, so they'll live like 8 to 10 years instead of 10 to 15, and they'll color up in 6 months instead of a year, or in 3 to 4 months they'll start coloring up instead of 6-7 months, things like that. But the big thing is just give them a good diet, give them a good home, and you'll start seeing that color coming in. Because as soon as you start seeing like early sparring between males, or males chasing the females a lot more, color is going to come in, because that's how they attract them all. And you might even see female color come in before male color if they're Ayumaru fish, because I've seen that before, where the female color starts to come in first and the females get bigger faster, and then the males like finally realize like, hey, I should start looking good. There's a reason to do this now. The rainbow fish can be really weird and really frustrating. They're a big game of patience, but that patience really pays off once you give them the time to color up. All right, so just a couple. We got more people showing up to chat. I'm just gonna put a little kind of PSA. If you do have a question, just do @BentleyPasco. It makes it much easier for me to see it in chat. Although chat's not like flying like crazy right now, so it's pretty easy for me to keep up. And then I will answer your question. One thing that I kind of want to go over. No, G-Bear, you didn't miss the stream. You're good. But I'm trying to think. So for those that are like really ramped up for the online Master Aquatic Horticulture program, I'm really, really, really hating Human Malware, because it's basically locked down my ability to do stuff. And some of my coworkers who work, or rather my friends who coworkers, I say it like that because they're going to help me with this project, but some of my friends who are helping out here, they've been working even more than normal because of this lockdown. So there's a lot of us who, all of our positions are essential staff where we work, and we're working even more because we're on skeleton crews. So like I'll give you an example. In my building at work, there is like 5% of the people that are normally there, and we are doing probably double the work we normally would, because we have to account for a lot of people who aren't there, or we have to do more things to help the people who are working remotely than we would if they were in person. So it can be quite a hassle, but in theory, all the Human Malware stuff is going to start slinking down a little bit, and I'll be able to move pretty quickly, because I've been in talks with my developer friends, and we kind of have an idea of what to do correctly. We just need to we really need to map it out on a whiteboard so that we know exactly what we're looking at, and then that makes it a lot easier on the code side for the guys that are actually doing the code work. But that has been tough. But I'm trying to sit down virtually with kind of the guy who's going to be basically the lead dev for me, and do a kind of virtual whiteboard, if you will, like a not a Zoom meeting, but very similar, and try to hash out some of the things and see timetable wise how quickly we can get things standing up. I think it shouldn't be too much longer once we can get working on it. Like, I think the initial code shouldn't take us more than like 2 weeks. And then I need like a week to test it. And make sure that like I can exploit it or break it, or that all the systems work as we expect before we deploy. But then once it's done, you guys will know. It'll get the grand fanfare, and there'll be several videos doing small tutorials on like how to use the website, and it's kind of like a web app. I mean, technically it's a website, but we'll walk through all that stuff, let you guys know, and I might end up, for posterity's sake, I might end up making a channel dedicated to just that program and having all of the tutorials over there as opposed to my channel. Because one of the things I said a long time ago is that if for some reason the program grows to a point of where I can't manage it or it's better in someone else's hands, I don't mind turning it over, because I want this to be a resource for people in general and not like some like my new business idea. That's how I retire. It's definitely not what I want. I'm very happy in my current career. So in having a YouTube channel that isn't mine, where these tutorials sit, and having them available on some other quote channel that is tied to the website, just makes that a little simpler. So we'll see. Like, as I know full details and I get stuff rolling as fast as possible, you guys will be in the loop, and there'll be at least a very minimum of video on my channel explaining what's going on and what to do, and that'll point you in the right direction, and then from there you'll have all the resources you need. Oh god, the Chaz. Jeez, I don't even want to talk about the Chaz, because I know some people that have gone down to the Chaz and they're just like, it's great and wonderful. I sat there going, until one person with a gun decides that they're going to do whatever they want because it's lawless down there. I mean, I'm pretty liberal. I'm going to put that out there in the sense of like social things like civil rights and stuff like that. But you kind of need police. You kind of need the fire department. You kind of need medical staff. You need these infrastructure things in any given society. It's some crazy town stuff happening, and it saddens me that people got hurt there. Because, you know, like, there's parts of it that were really cool, and I had some friends that I trust in the tech industry who like went down there and checked out the chop, the Chaz, whatever you want to call it, and we're like, no, it's great, blah 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 blah. I was like, it's not my jam, man. I'm fine with, you know, just not going to that. Mostly because I have fish tanks and they're all in my house. I can't take a fish tank to the shop. Also, I think the Chaz was a cooler name than the shop, but that's me. There's still a lot of like protest stuff going on in Seattle. It's amusing to me that Seattle is protesting as long as they are. I would have thought a lot of people would kind of like, yeah, let's go back to, we got a couple things, that's good, but you're gonna see some stuff here soon, as long as if all like the landlords get really angry at the people who can't pay their rent, which is, man, it's not their fault. It's not their fault at all. It's gonna get really ugly, and that's the thing that scares me, because there's so many things being mismanaged, but it's on every front. It's not like blame this person. It's everybody. That's the problem. And that's the most political you're ever going to see me get on this channel, because I hate talking politics. So, I got 2 questions from Ken and Tariq, so let's do those, because fish questions are way better than politics. So from Ken, is it normal for a betta to change color from white to dark blue? This happened gradually over a few months. So Ken, if you had a pretty young betta, like they could have got to size really fast, but in general was a young betta, they color change for like the first year of their life, something like that, quite a while. So they don't settle into their color for a bit. So normally what we see at like a Petco or whatever, they're adults and their color's all settled in and all that kind of stuff. You can occasionally get younger bettas, and you get to like watch their color evolve, and I think that's a super cool process. I've only had two kids, or said two kids, two bettas. I was reading Chevy Fish's comment, and I said two kids instead of two bettas. I've only ever had two bettas young enough where I got to watch the color change happen, and they were both like halfway into their colors. So like they had their fin color, but their body color really hadn't settled in all the way yet. And there were little parts of their fin color had shifted, but almost nothing. And just that process, it's kind of like watching rainbows color up. It's, to me, watching a fish that goes through like a major color evolution as it grows is just super cool. And I think that's part of why I like koi, because koi slowly change their patterning and color over a long period of time. And a koi that you see at a year old is going to look most likely very different at 2 years and at 3 years. And it to me, that is one of like the magical part of fish, is watching those evolutions change in pattern and color. It is something that, like, how do I put this? I've watched a lot of, in the last like 2 weeks, while I'm at work doing the stuff I do, I have YouTube on in the background very typically. And the channel I've been watching the most of was Greg Whitsock, the pond guy, for those who are familiar with him. So that's the Aqualand and the Team Aquascape guys. And they go out and they do like all these crazy water features or they'll tour crazy water features they built in the past. And I mean, a lot of these people have a lot of money, let's be fair. But they build all these really cool things. And watching like someone's backyard be turned into this like pseudo nature thing is really, really cool to watch. But they never really talk about how, like, when they'll put koi in these ponds, they never talk about how, like, the cool thing you get to watch beyond the plants growing in and getting lush and looking more and more natural as the plants grow in. Yeah, the Shack water feature, man, that thing is insane. The thing they built for Shack is so cool. There's one, I might have to go like look it up and put it on my community tab later, because I don't want to go hunting for too long. But there's one where the guy like basically has his own at-home arboretum, and it's crazy. And he's on like 9 acres or something insane like that, and he's just got pond after pond after pond, river streams, and all this crazy stuff. And I've looked at it and I was like, if I ever won the lotto, which I don't play the lotto, so I guess that's kind of impossible. But if I ever won the lotto, that would be my backyard. It'd be just some insane, nonsensical series of ponds and streams and waterfalls, and plants and fish, and I would be in heaven. The only problem is, like, how do you get that all the tropical temperatures so I can just put rainbows everywhere? The answer is you don't want to try and heat that much water, but you know, like koi, I love koi. I just don't keep them because I can't do a proper pond. I can't install one with any reason. Like, I would want a big pond, not a like little bitty pond that some people do and they put koi in it. Like, no, I want koi to have like their own lake, you know. And those are expensive to put in, and I'm not digging my own. But yeah, so that I've been watching a lot of that, and the thing that I think is kind of criminally underappreciated when they talk about stuff is that they don't talk about the fact that the fish are slowly going to change their color and pattern over time, and that you get to watch that too as everything grows and settles in. You get to enjoy that part as well if you ever get to the point of where you get like a custom water feature or a pond or something like that. Like, it's not just the plants growing in around the landscaping, it's the fish coloring and their patterns shifting a little bit. And you know, like a kohaku or whatever might have, you know, only 2 spots when you first get it as a very small fish, but that could become a 3 or 4 step kohaku, right? And it's just so cool to me, like, that fish do that kind of stuff. And I think it's part of why I love rainbows so much. I get to watch that pattern happen, and it is slow enough to where it's like, okay, it's this little pencil streak. Like a month later, it's like, it almost looks like a fish. Then, like it starts looking like a little teeny tiny rainbow fish in body, but it's like silver minnow. And it's like, all right. And now it looks like a rainbow fish, but it doesn't have any color. And then the color starts to come in, and slowly you get to watch them all color up. And it's just such a cool process to me. Like, I think that's part of the biggest appeal to fish to me is that. So, just a thought. You get to watch that betta color up, Ken. I'm a little jealous. I love young bettas. I've actually been kind of missing having a betta because I haven't had one for a while. But I don't have a reasonable place to put a betta right now. So I don't want to be irresponsible and just go get one and be like, I could just put it in whatever tank, right? No, you have a proper tank for the betta. All right, so from Tariq, I have a 70-gallon tank with many, many plants, but I got a very bad green water. I don't know that green water is all that bad. The rainbow guy says, from the perspective of, man, green water is the best thing in the world to raise your fish in. So you can use an algicide, like there's a algae fix out there that API makes that will kill the green water. The other thing that can deal with green water is lots of big water changes. And you can also you can use carbon to help a little bit, but then you're risking some nutrient pull away from your plants. I'm amazed with a lot of plants that you were able to get green water, because I think that's like one of the hardest parts for me is like you usually have to rip all your plants out and then green water happens. But yeah, I would look at like an algae fix. API makes algae fix, I think it's API. That's pretty effective. Just make sure that you follow the directions exactly and add extra aeration to the tank, because as that green water starts to die, it can consume oxygen. It does a weird thing to the amount of oxygen in there. That's another thing. You could add scuds. You could add scuds to your tank, and they'll eat that green water something fierce. So will Daphnia, but if you got enough fish, they're going to eat them. Then they won't live. So there's that. There's if you're the chemical way is that scuds or Daphnia are the way to do it naturally. And you can use like filter floss or carbon is a good way to filter it out of the water, filter the particulates out. It just takes a while, and it takes a lot of it. But that's kind of the ways you can approach it. I need to culture green water and stop being a slacker because it's great. Front of a window. Yeah, sunlight's going to cause some green water, that's for certain. No, Bob Steenfot's in the house. Watch out. Bob must be bored if he's showing up to my stream. Oh, man. Okay, so I wanted to go back. Man, Chevy, both your kids lost their jobs. I'm sorry, dude. That's rough. I mean, it is good to like spend time with the kids, but oi. And it sucks because like a lot of small businesses are what's really getting hurt in all this nonsense. Bob's a great example, right? He was having trouble getting proper stock in for a while, and I think he's just now starting to be able to get stuff. And even then, a lot of the stuff you normally get, you can't get right now. It sucks if you're a fisher and you want to buy fish right now because the world is just against you. It is the worst. But yeah, I mean, as long as y'all got roofs, that's what matters, right? I really want... so, for those who, if you don't know Friday Fish Facts, so Ron DeSantis, he did a tour with... a gentleman named Dave Carlson, who is the president of the Vancouver Aquarium Society. So Vancouver, Canada, that is. And he's been the president of that society for 25 years. And they're a little smaller than Greater Seattle Aquarium Society, but they put on a fantastic auction every year. That's like a month or a week or something like that after ours. I can't remember. So it's like this common thing for certain people to like come down to the Seattle auction from Canada, and then for a bunch of the Seattleites to go up to the Canadian auction. So it's kind of like that lovely interaction between our clubs when Human Malware goes away. But Dave's fish room got toured by Ron on Friday Fishbacks, and I think he put it out yesterday, maybe it's Thursday. But he has a tactic for raising baby fish where he puts he has a green water culture that also has Daphnia in it. So he has this like green water Daphnia laden starter that he puts in whatever raising tank he's got with a mob. And he does a lot of rainbow fish, amongst other things. And those fish hatch out, and they can eat all the green water to get big enough. And then when they get big enough, the Daphnia colony is now big and thriving. And then they can just start picking off the Daphnia. And to me, it was just, I was sitting there watching, and I was like, that is freaking genius. Because I never thought of doing that or trying to get some of the people I know who are better at green water than I am to try that. And so now I'm very curious about trying to keep a similar culture going whenever I can get my garage going, which I'm getting close. I'm getting close to emptying my garage. Once it's empty, then I might be able to see how much it's going to cost me to build it into a fish room. And try to figure out how to get that rolling. But yeah, I've been trying to work with people. A funny story about this. It's like I've been trying to get a freight container, a 20-inch shipping container, as a 20 foot. Jeez, 20 inch. Yeah, that's going to be really effective at holding things. A 20-foot shipping container out at my mom's place on the other side of the state, because a lot of her stuff from when I first bought the house, my mom moved in with me for a while, and then she like got set up with a new job over in the other side of the state and has been over there for a while in her own home. So I've had her stuff for a long time in my garage. And for those that have been here around, you guys know that, like, my mom was fighting breast cancer for a while. So it was like, I definitely was not going to pressure her to get stuff out of my house. Like, you're fighting cancer, go fight cancer. My garage doesn't matter. And now, like, she's through the thick of that, and for the most part, I've been trying to find a way to get a shipping container to act as a storage unit, because it's like the cheapest way to build basically a shed in your backyard when she has a reasonable sized backyard. But everything got shut down because of Human Malware, and just within the last week or so, I was able to get in touch with the company I've been working with and be like, hey, so can we pick up where we left off? Like, can you figure out if you can maneuver this thing in place because of the way that her driveway is set up and the way they have to bring in a semi-truck and all that kind of stuff? Can we do this and get that in place so that then I can, like, you know, work on moving stuff out of my garage across the state and slowly reclaim my garage? And yeah, like, if I thought I could reliably move a shipping container into my backyard and turn it into a fish room, I'd be interested in doing it. But not with the way my place is set up. That'd be impossible. They just drop it in my driveway and say good luck, and that would not be great. Because my driveway is like skinny and long, and I would just be stuck, or I'd be walking past a container every day to get to my house after parking. Chubby Guppy, what's up? Yeah, no, I'm staying pretty safe. Like, aside from when I'm at home, I'm constantly wearing a mask and all that kind of stuff. And while I hate it because it makes this, like, part of my face feel super hot, it's a necessary evil in the sense of just being safe, not trying to get sick. Like, we had bronchitis run through the house, and I don't need something far worse. Like, bronchitis is just annoying. Where, like, COVID's scary. COVID's scary. What it does to your lungs and your breathing system. No thanks, man. Oogie doogie. So yeah, there's been some fun stuff going on that I've been trying to do. And, like, Bob can't order me fish. Although, to be fair, it's good that he can't order me fish because I don't have space right now. But soon, we're going to talk. The nice thing about shipping containers is that they're cheap. You can get a shipping container pretty cheap. Oh man, if you got questions, shoot. Like we're a little quiet today, which might mean a slightly shorter stream. We'll see. So re-escape the crypt tank. Plan on using Flourish Advanced to help reestablish the roots. Any ideas on having them hate me for a shorter amount of time? I mean, CO2 is your best friend, but really, they'll as long as the difference in the water is really minimal, they'll settle in pretty fast. The thing with crypts is like when there's a relatively decent shift in the water parameters is when they get angry. If it's basically the same water parameters, they're just getting moved around and rescaped, they tend not to be as angry as long. So there's that. Green Ranger, I will get your question in a second, but because I was talking about this, so 3431 Tiger, are shipping containers reliable to have a fish room in? Yes, no. Let me answer. So you would have to modify the shipping container because shipping containers aren't necessarily insulated. You can get them insulated, and you're going to want to do something for airflow in order to help get moisture out of the room so that the container doesn't like start rusting. The big thing is getting the container on a very flat surface, so that you're not like fighting uneven tanks all the time. So a lot like when you're building a brand new storage shed or something like that, you want to like grade out some gravel underneath it so that it's nice and flat, so that when that thing gets put into place, it is as level as possible. And then you've got to find a way to run power out to it and water. And like Bob said, there's plenty of people that have done like shipping container homes where they use solar panels to help get power, and you could run, a good solar panel will run air pumps, no problem. Depending on what kind of fish you're keeping, will depend on whether you needed to heat or cool that thing, depending on the time of year. So there's questions you have to answer, but it's basically a giant steel box. So yes, it should be fine. So it's one of those, like, you just have to address certain things like getting power and airflow through them. But in general, yeah, most of the used shipping containers that you're going to buy, and you can buy them brand new too, there are companies that pre-modify them for you, but you can buy just a base shipping container from as cheap as like $1,300 from some places. Typically, like 20-foot shipping container is going to run you somewhere between $1,500 and like $1,800 after taxes, depending on where you're at. That's from my experience looking for them, and I looked at several different companies in the Washington area, which Washington's a little more expensive than some other places. So if you're in like the Midwest, where cost of living is a lot lower, they might even be cheaper for you. It just depends. It might also be more expensive because they're less likely to have as many shipping containers there, because like we're a port city in Seattle, we get tons of them all the time. It's one of those things. I honestly, like, if I had the kind of space that you're talking about, Ro, I would just build one of those prefab metal buildings and get it set from there and have a like fully established building, as opposed to like chaining shipping containers together. It's a little more expensive, but it's going to be far more, how do I put this? Far more long term. Okay, so I'm going to go back. Where did that go? So Green Ranger, help, my tank is getting overrun with staghorn algae. So here's the thing. Staghorn algae is really, really rough. The biggest thing is finding where where your system is out of balance and how that is contributing to the staghorn is the biggest thing. And that's going to be hard because there's so many different factors. Nutrients, overfeeding, water quality, light. There's a lot of things you need to look at. Flow can be part of it. The biggest thing is remove as much of the staghorn algae as you can by hand. And that includes using tools, but get as much out as you can. Don't rely on fish or something like that to kill it, or an algicide or anything like that. Then what we're going to start doing is using, I would say cut your feeding first, because almost always most algae outbreaks tend to be an issue with phosphates, and we've been overfeeding our fish. Cut your feeding in half. So if you're feeding every day, feed every other day. Your fish will be fine. Your fish can go days without food. It's actually a good thing to train your fish to be used to going a day or two without food and getting fed. And then having like a fasting day or a couple days fasting every week or so. Because then if you ever need to go on a vacation or a weekend trip, your fish will be fine. They're not going to fight each other. Now, if you have super aggressive fish, that might be harder. You might need like auto feeders. And then you want to like cut your amount of food per day down. So if you feed, if I get a big pinch out of my thing of flakes and I throw that in every day, now I want to do a little pinch. I'm going to grind it up as small as I can so that every fish gets a shot, and it's not just a couple big flakes and it's gone. If you don't see any improvement, and in fact, like every time you remove it, it comes back at the same rate, now it's probably not phosphates, it's probably light or your nutrient balance. So then we start looking at cutting our light down or cutting the rate at which we fertilize, or it might be we need to fertilize more. You might not have enough plants fighting off algae. It's all dependent on the tank. So realistically, like, shoot me an email. This staghorn algae is a really difficult question. It's not something that can be easily answered, to be honest. The few cases of staghorn that get out there, and like, I'll be honest, I've only dealt with staghorn once, and that's just, I call that luck for the number of tanks that I do. But there's my email. Shoot me an email. Give me some pictures, and tell me how long you've been dealing with it. Give me as much detail about your feeding regime, your fertilizing regime, and your light as you can, and your water changes, and I will try to help you out from there, Green Ranger. All right. So Turritopsis, the eternal jellyfish, can carbonated water add-ins be useful as a CO2 unit? I mean, yes, but it's not as reliable as just injecting pressurized CO2. I know a lot of people don't want to do pressurized CO2 because they look at the initial cost and it seems like it's a lot, but once you do it, the maintenance cost of doing it is so cheap compared to like all the other weird ways of trying to do CO2 that it becomes worth it. And you can put so little CO2 into a tank and get massive benefit from it. If you don't need to like ADA this thing and just be dumping a ton of CO2 into a tank to get it to be effective. A little CO2 goes a long way, and like Corey was even talking about this recently, and I was driving, so I couldn't pipe in the fact that how dare he not refer to my method of CO2. Sarcasm, of course. So like I go by what I call the American barbecue method, which is low and slow on CO2. So an example, in a 40-gallon breeder, I will do 2 bubbles per second of CO2. It's not a lot. Not a lot. And the reason why I do that is because that little bit of CO2 goes a long way and prevents me from needing to like trim plants every week. It gives me good color. It helps the growth. It helps them be more lush, but also doesn't like take over a tank instantly. I don't have to worry about gassing out my fish because I'm pushing too much CO2. It's like the safest way to do CO2. And also, I can do a single 20-pound CO2 tank across three different tanks at that kind of rate, and that will last me 9 months. And it costs $26 to refill that tank. So, in a 2-year period, I will have refilled that thing twice. It will have cost me $55 or whatever in 2 years after the initial setup. And that's good CO2 to 3 different tanks. Perfect. That's A-okay to me. So I know a lot of people like look at CO2 and go, that's so expensive. I get it, but once you have CO2 in place, it's worth it. Now that being said, not everybody needs CO2. And if you're doing like Nubius, Java Fern, and all that stuff, you don't need CO2. Just dial your light down so it's not too much light, and then you don't have algae issues. And don't like over fertilize, right? You don't need to fertilize like 3 times a week at a full dose. They're not consuming that much. Understanding like what your tank needs and how to balance to make that optimal is the biggest thing that sadly has to be learned. I can't just like tell you because every tank is different. And that's, I think, the hardest thing with, like an example is like the Fluval 3.0s, right? Like I have my suggested settings. The hardest thing is that my suggested settings are all based on me using a 40 breeder. And a lot of people are using like 20 longs with the same settings. Or a different tank entirely with the same settings. And they're like, I'm getting this huge algae breakout. And it's like, yeah, you're a tank that's 6 inches shorter. Like my tank is 18 inches tall, your tank is 12 inches tall. Of course you're going to. Like that's the hardest thing to like teach people, and it's really hard to get out. So which is why like there's another Fluval video I need to do in order to go over that kind of stuff. It's tough. It's really tough. But it's one of those things that sadly I think is best learned by failing a lot. And like finding the answer in your own, because like the other thing is your own water is going to be so different than mine. You could live 3 blocks down the road and your water in your tanks is different than my water in my tanks. This is just the way aquariums are. Now, for the most part, they're very similar if you live in the same region as someone. You know, most of the people in the Seattle area have kind of the same base water. It's just a matter of like how our own personal maintenance is and all that kind of stuff. But there are lots of questions that come into aquatics and water chemistry and all that stuff, and that's why there's no perfect answer, but we can usually like tinker with something and slowly work those answers out. All right, so the next one from Mr. Littles again. I have a Nubius coming in from the co-op, and last time I got a Nubius, it suffered from rot. Any suggestion on what I can do to give the new plants the opportunity to thrive? I think your video last week, typically but not always, said attach them and throw them in. Yeah, so like, in the case of epiphyte plants in general, but let's do it specifically Nubius because the rot is really specific to Nubius. Attaching them either via string or via glue to a piece of hardscape and putting that in the water is really all you need to do, and they're going to adjust on their own. If you start seeing rot, here's the big thing. One of the things that is most frequent to cause a Nubius rot to happen or to spread is crushing. So when we take a pair of aquarium scissors or normal scissors, that's not a super sharp edge, right? And there's a little bit of crushing that happens. Well, on a rhizome as thick as most of Nubius, that is just going to keep that rot spreading. So when you're doing any division of rhizomes, or you get something that has a little bit of rot and you're trying to stop it, use a brand new fresh razor blade. You need it as sharp as possible, and you need to make the cleanest cut possible to cut the rot away. That is going to help you stop it. In most cases where I have seen someone start to see a Nubius rot and never be able to stop it is because they're using some form of aquarium scissor, which is great for stems, but it puts a little crush on a big thick rhizome, and that crush causes problems long term. And even completely healthy Nubius can start suffering rot from that crushing power. So that's the most common. And the thing is, like, they divide all this Nubius at farms right before they send it out, which is where they don't necessarily use the sharpest razor blade they can. They use whatever they have available. And that might be a machete. Well, if it starts to crush around the edges of the rhizome, that can cause rot to settle in, and it might not settle in right away. It might be a month down the line. It might be 2 months down the line. But there's some like slow necrosis process that begins to occur that causes what we generally call rhizome rot. Now, there's lots of reasons that rhizome rot happens that we don't understand. But that is one that I have found in experience and from talking to several other plant nerds that I trust, that their way to solve the problem is their divisions have to be done with basically a completely fresh razor blade or something that is extremely sharp and extremely small like that, so that you're not causing that crushing to occur. As far as acclimation, piece of coconut husk, rocks, driftwood, whatever you can find, even just leaving it in the pot, because like I've had some Anubias from the co-op that I've got. I just leave it in the pot and drop it in and let it convert, get used to my water for like a week or two. If I have CO2, 1 week. If I don't have CO2, 2 weeks typically. And then I'll move it out and I'll attach it. And if it has lots of long roots, I cut all of those down to where they're no more than about 1/2 inch in length. Get it applied to whatever piece of hardscape I'm going to get it on. And what that does is that encourages, because now it doesn't have any long roots, it's going to encourage that plant to stimulate root growth, because it's going to go, oh man, I lost all my roots. How am I going to grab onto these things? I need to grab on. I need to get nutrients. I need to do all these things to live. And it's going to stimulate it to, instead of growing new leaves and getting the rhizome larger, it's going to force more roots out. And then that's going to settle that plant into your water system significantly better. A couple of tips from my experience of what I've done with them. A lot of talk to Rose Aquatics. Man, Rose is just like a little celebrity today. You can check out Rose on Get Gills. Just a little free advertising plug there. I checked out Rose. Was it Dan's stream that you mentioned you had a sale going on? So I checked out what you had going. I looked at a few things. I was like, oh, all right, not bad. Nice little selection. I don't have tank space for anything, but it's okay. Ian, don't worry. You can always watch the replay. I know it's not as good. But if you do have a question for those newer folks that have showed up, at Bentley Pasco, it's an easy way to make sure I don't miss your question. Then ask away. Just let's skip the politics, please. I would much rather talk fish. Oh, man. Okay, so Devin. Hey, Bentley, when do you turn on and off your CO2 on your DaySim Fluval 3.0 tank? I've seen your comment 30 minutes before light goes on and an hour before light goes off. Is that 6:30, 19:30? Yes. So 30 minutes before the sunrise ever begins, I start CO2. And then 30 minutes before the light goes, the time before the light goes completely off is when I turn it off. Now again, keep in mind, I do very low amounts of CO2. So if you're going to push higher amounts of CO2 in your tank, I would push the off point to an hour before the lights go off. So if you're like, say, in a 40 breeder, I do 2 bubbles a second. If you're doing 5 or 6, half an hour before is still good, because that ramp up time, it's not really going to consume a lot of CO2 to let the CO2 build up. But then I would basically, at the end of my full light, I would consider turning off my CO2 then. Even as early as then, because as that light starts ramping down, we're not photosynthesizing as much, and that CO2 could start building up. So just general advice would be one of those 2 ways. Now, without CO2, the 30-30 is perfectly fine, especially if you're low CO2 like me. If you're pushing more CO2, 30 minutes before, start CO2. An hour before off, turn off your CO2. General rule of thumb, usually pretty effective. It's kind of how I like to roll. I'm going to try and do there's one more Fluval video that I'm going to do for the 3.0 plant light, and that will cover CO2 with a little more depth. And I'll have like 3 specific settings in that video that are just there for specific cases. So, like, I'm just starting a tank with this light. There's going to be 3 settings that you work through to minimize algae, things like that. But the final setting is basically my day sim, and then I'll give advice on how to time your CO2 with day sim in that video. But that's basically the setup right there. So I hope that answers your question, Devin. Pam, I recently set up a planted tank and started a fishless cycle. I now have Hydra. Ooh. Supposed to come into the plants. I ordered flubenazole to treat the tank. How long before I can add fish? So depending on the fish, some fish will just eat the Hydra. Like rainbows will ignore it. Guppies will eat it. Adult guppies, if they're bigger guppies. Mollies will eat them. Angels sometimes will eat them, and sometimes they'll be lazy. But in general, I would say do like 2 weeks of treatment until you see basically no Hydra left, or preferably if you have no Hydra whatsoever. And then do a nice big water change to make sure whatever excess flubendazole fembendazole, Jiminy Christmas. I can speak English, I promise. Get the last of the fembendazole out, and then you should be fine. Should be fine at that point, as long as your rest of your ammonia and all that stuff checks out. I plan on keeping livestock tank heater glass tops on my ponds and keep breeding fish through the winter. Do you think that will work? Depending on the species of fish, yeah. The biggest thing is just making sure that you have plenty of oxygen exchange. So here's an interesting thing from Dean. This is a theory conversation that we had with each other, which is that if you're pumping in cold air from outside, you are going to naturally probably cool the water. Because it makes sense, cold air going into a warm body is going to cause some amount of cooling beyond just evaporative cooling when everything bubbles at the surface. Yeah, and Chubby Guppy's right. Like, Lucas Bretz does this where he has heated ponds throughout the winter in... he's outside Indianapolis, isn't he? And it gets quite cold out there, and they do just fine. So it's make sure that you have plenty of oxygen in your water. So just good air stones, a good pump that you know is going to really keep going. If you can get that pump, somehow have it in an area that keeps it insulated so that the diaphragm doesn't freeze up, because there is some potential risk of that. That should be fine, especially if you're doing a lot of the species that can handle cooler water. I wouldn't even worry about it. Like Magnus, you have 10M. What am I? Did I miss something earlier? Let me look. Just gonna scroll through chat because I feel like I'm missing something. Magnus, I feel like I'm missing part of what you're trying to ask, so if you can just let me know again in chat, I'll happily answer it. So you have 10M. I'm not sure whether that's 10 males, 10 melanotania, a really interesting version of the 3M company. I'm not sure. Bad joke. So Tariq, let me answer that question. Do I plan on making a programming YouTube channel? No, not at all. I think there are far better resources already out there to try and teach people how to program. I'm a software test engineer, so I don't necessarily code very much. I can understand code when I look at it for the languages that I know, but I don't write code very often. An example would be my boss sent me this document of something that he didn't understand yesterday, and he was like, here's this, do you understand it, can we do it? And I just went, what? This mentions some stuff I've never even heard of. I don't know. Maybe if I have better details to know, like what these commands are supposed to run in, because they don't look like they run in the like 4 tools that we normally use. Maybe I can figure it out. He was like, okay, yeah, that's kind of how I felt looking at it. I was just hoping maybe I'd get lucky if I just sent it to you. Come on, man. That's part of the tech world, though. You get that kind of stuff. Okay, accidental send. Totally understand. So 10 Melantania praecox in my display. Some look like they're getting a bit skinny, and one has developed 2 or 3 big lumps under the skin along the lateral line. Ugh. So, initially, I would guess you were looking at some kind of internal parasite. However, this also can be one of the ways that fish tuberculosis presents itself in rainbow fish. So rainbow fish haven't been in the hobby very long compared to a lot of other fish, and they are extremely susceptible to fish tuberculosis. Way more than most other fish. Normally, you will see some other signs externally before something like this, but I have in the case seen what looks almost like a white head of a zit coming out of a fish before, and that was an indicator of fish TB. So, yeah, man. So I would I would quarantine all those fish into a different tank if possible. Something like 20 gallons, if you can, because the praecox can handle a smaller tank. The first kind of broad shot that I would take at those is actually trying levamisole and seeing. I mean, if you have a fish vet nearby, I would almost say try and get a hold of a fish vet. But the other person you might ask a question to, so other than like, because if this is fish TB, you can't stop it. There's no cure for fish TB. They'll live a certain amount of time, but you're never gonna prevent them from dying. You could separate the sick fish from the healthy fish, and eventually the healthy fish will develop it because they've been in the water system long enough with those other fish. They're going to get it. And some of the like really hardcore rainbow guys, they as soon as they see it, they euthanize the entire tank, and that breaks my heart because I'm that guy who's gonna let them live as long as they can and try to give them the best life I can because I'm a big fucking softie. But sorry, I just swore and I shouldn't have. It's been a long week. Anyway, it's long enough in the stream. Who cares, right? That's how you know it's not content for kids, YouTube. I'm a big softie. I don't like really euthanizing fish unless I absolutely have to. Like if I got a zigzaggy back guppy or something, I'll try and let them live as long as I can. I'm that much of a softie. But I would separate them, and I would look at either levamisole or trying to think, because if it's internal, you really need something other than like praziquantel. I mean, you could try like Prazipro or General Cure, but I would look at something a little more powerful. And yeah, you can let the cripples go to the old mystery snail tank. Mystery snails take care of that bad boy whenever they're gone. You'll never even know it. So yeah, Magnus, unfortunately, this is a really how do I put this? It's a scary situation because I've seen that be the case of fish TB in the past. However, that does not always mean fish TB. There's a gentleman that I would actually send an email to. Let me open up a window over here. Let's see if I can quickly find his site. Oh, it's going to be harder than I thought. So the gentleman that Friday Fish Facts did a tour with, he has a contact, and he's actually really good at diagnosing diseases in fish. So if you go to this website, I had to go hunt it down. So amazingaquariums.ca. That's Dave Carlson. He is the president of the Vancouver Aquarium Society, and he also runs a fish maintenance type business. He's really good at identifying disease, and he's also a big rainbow nerd. So you might go into his contact section and try shooting him an email and explain what's going on. If you can get a picture of the one guy that has the bumps in the lateral line, and he might be able to help you out. But my initial thing is possibly an internal parasite, possibly fish TB. Look at probably specifically levamisole to start, although that's mostly a dewormer. But start looking at some antiparasitics. You can start with GenCure because it's probably the most easy. If you're in an area where you can't get most of the antiparasitic medicines, that might be really tough, and you might literally be living off of salts and heat and hoping. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry that I can't give you a perfect answer, because that's a really tough one. Let's see here. From Ernest, in a few months when Bozeman and I are settled in, I want to add another fish, maybe a Cory. Any good rainbow fish tank mates for a Planet 40 breeder that won't take attention from the bows? I mean, like, Corys are good, loaches are good. Though you could look at like yo-yo loaches and dwarf chain loaches, those kind of loaches that will sit and move in the substrate. The biggest thing is just making sure the food gets down to them. Like, I think Corys and rainbows are just an awesome combo all the time. And very recently I picked up some yo-yo loaches just because I wanted to have some loaches in a sand tank instead of Corys, because I have Corys in other tanks. And they're in with like the mixed rainbow tank that I have. So there's that. Beyond that, I mean, like, lots of things I don't think are going to take attention away from the rainbows. They're just going to cause a different type of attention, if that makes sense. Like, rainbows are hard to not like pay attention to because there's so much color and they can be so active, and they really pay attention to people when you come in the room. They learn when humans come into the room to like just sit there and beg because they're very good beggars when it comes to food. And a lot of people like that because, like, if the fish is sitting there looking at them and paying attention to them, it's really cool. I enjoy it. Like, my fish just sitting in a corner staring at me for food. It's fun to tease them a little bit. But yeah, I would look at those kind of options. There's a lot of stuff you could do. I mean, even plecos are going to hide for an eternity. Work. If you want to see stuff, you know, another thing that's a great combination that I feel doesn't take attention away. It's just kind of like, oh, that's neat that's there in there. Angelfish. Angelfish go good with rainbows. They really do. They're just a different kind of centerpiece fish. And if your centerpiece fish is angels and like people aren't paying attention to rainbow fish, like, I don't know. I think their attention's in the wrong spot, but I think they're a good like cohabitating fish. And if all else fails, like, don't be afraid to just have like algae eating crews that are more get themselves out there more. So some of the larger autosynclus and stuff like that. That kind of stuff. Wouldn't worry about it too much. I would, if you're trying to keep like your substrate clean, I think Corys are your best bet. Just be prepared that they're going to dig a space out to just hide a lot, and that might mean uprooting some of your crypts or something like that if you don't have some open space for them to swim through and hang out in. Oh, personal questions about like how I'm dealing with human malware in my job. So it's not, how do you put this? It's not so much that I'm needing to deal with it. The biggest difference in my life in general. So like traffic isn't as bad right now because of human malware. There's not as many people on the road. So I get to work and I get home faster. But I also have dogs to give attention to whenever I get home, on top of like spending some time with my lady. Really what I've been doing is I've been spending more, and not a lot, but a little bit more everyday time with my gal. And sometimes that's as simple as I'll come home, she'll be downstairs, and I'll sit on the couch, and we'll just talk a little bit, and we'll have dinner, and we'll watch like some random TV show on Netflix or part of a movie. I'm one of those people who I can watch like half a movie today, and the other half of the movie the next day or the day after, and be totally happy with it. I'm not one of those people that has to watch it in one shot. So like we'll watch stuff in little chunks, and we'll spend time with Papa Limo. And you know, like when I get home, he's super excited. I sit down on the couch. He's got to like jump and crawl all over me because he's still a puppy. And I kind of need to train him off of that. But you know, it's just I spend a little bit of time doing that. I just have a few extra responsibilities in my personal life. Now, work related, there's a lot of stuff that I can do working from home. So some of my extra hours are typically here working and at my desk at home. And that tends to be like, you know, filing bugs on issues that I've found or writing reports. I can do that kind of stuff from home, and communication kind of stuff I can even do from my phone. So there's a lot of times where I'm running an errand, like going to the grocery store or going to Costco or something like that. And I'm on my phone the whole time communicating back and forth with people I work with. And it might sound like, Jesus, you get no break from work. And it's kind of one of those things where it's I'm okay with it, if that makes sense. Like, it's just part of how I've been doing life in the tech field for a long time now. And it's part of why, how to put this? It is part of why I can have some of those luxuries. Like an example would be, I have a medical appointment just to check up on myself. It's a usual kind of maintenance-y type things, right? With my doctor coming up, and I just sent an email to my boss. It was like, hey, I have this medical appointment. It's like dead in the middle of the day. Do you mind if I just work from home and do a bunch of the other side stuff that we normally would do, and shift some of the test coverage with my coworker, and then just make it easier on doing my appointment and not come in for like 2 hours, then be gone for like 4, and then come back and work until god-awful hours of the night. And he was like, yeah, that's the problem. Because he knows that all the stuff that I do remotely, I do it really efficiently as is, and it's not losing productivity. It's not like, oh, you're going to work from home, you're going to do nothing, right? So that helps. It helps give me some little luxuries here and there, but definitely not to the level of like stay home and monitor a fish room and take care of baby fish and stuff like that, or ship fish. God, I can never ship fish right now. Although I would like it if Bob Steenfot would ship some of my fish. Just saying. Somebody asked way earlier, and I totally spaced on answering about the guppies. The guppies are doing great. I need to do some maintenance in their tank so that I can show them. There's somebody who requested specifically that I hadn't like shown the guppy tank in like close to a year. So I'll have a short kind of video on that coming out. I gotta do maintenance to the tank to make it look a little better, not have some dust allergy on the glass and stuff like that, because getting auto sinkless right now is a nightmare. They can't find them anywhere, which sucks because I would really love to just like just throw a horde of auto sinkless in that tank, and they'd have food forever because the tank's so big and there's so much plant life to just slowly graze on. The autos that are in there are so fat. They're huge. Man, Dan's Fish, my other buddy. What's up, man? Good to see you. I wish Dan was closer to me. I wish Dan wasn't in Wyoming. Dan, I need you to move your entire operation to some portion of Washington. It doesn't have to be Seattle because that's too expensive, but like even Eastern Washington would be fine. Can you just pack up everything and do that real fast? Um, but yeah, no, like Bob's. I've talked a little bit with Bob, and there's some, how to put this. There are things that we specifically want to do together as far as shipping fish. Um, it's just working some of those things out. No, Ian, I haven't looked at the wet spot. I've mostly looked locally because I'm trying to help my local stores keep going through all this stuff. Because a couple of my local stores have really been hurting, and if I can spend, I literally went into one of my local stores and I asked them like, "Do you have auto sinkless?" They were like, "No, but we might get like 10 in next week's order if we're lucky." And I was like, "Oh, I was thinking on the order of like I need 70." The gal looked at me like I had grown an extra head because she's never had anybody want to order that many before. And I was like, I have 24 planted tanks that have small auto sinkless crews in them, and they all could stand to have lots. Like, damn it, I both need them, but like, I don't want to like order them online because I want to help my local stores. So a couple of them are doing really good. Like Aquarium Co-op's fine, and Denny's Pet World is another bigger one. They're fine. You know, they have lots of dog and stuff like that people come in regularly buying like their dry food for their dogs and their bully sticks and stuff like that. But some of the other like dedicated fish stores hurting quite a bit because it's very, very hard right now. But yeah, it's I might look at wet spot if I get started getting desperate. Honestly, wet spot's gonna be one of those places where I'd look if I wanted like the less common auto sinkless. So common autos, like I'd just wait until they show up at my LFS and give my LFS some money and pay the premium for it. But if I wanted something a little rare like Zebra Auto or something like that, that's where I'd start looking at wet spot because they get some really neat stuff in every once in a while. But yeah, it's a good idea. Dan's fish would get in auto sinkless. Dan, I need 100 auto sinkless like tomorrow. Can you make that happen? Since you're moving out here with your backpack, can you just bring me a bunch of autos too while you're at it? Oh man. New Jersey is stocked up like nothing happened, really. How are they? I wonder who their like suppliers are, because a lot of the suppliers have been having issues as far as the West Coast is concerned. But yeah, so rainbows are a thing to answer you, Mr. Littles. That is actually one of the things that Bob and I specifically talked about is some of the rainbows, like his Bozeman eye that I have. That once I get them cranking again, there will be a good number of spare Atinjo, Gary Lang, Bozeman that will go to Bob. And there's some that are going to him for him to keep as his personal stock, and there are others that will go to Bob for him to sell. But keep in mind, that's like probably a year out. Because I need, basically what we talked about is whenever I can do my garage, which is a long-term thing, and have proper breeding space where I'm breeding more than just like, I can bring in one group of 30 fish, and then it'll be 6 months till I have more, but where I'm like regularly breeding fish and have lots of different groups. Then that's where Bob and I are like more seriously going to talk about, hey, how often can I get fish X and fish Y? And it'll be one of those things where I will breed probably 2 or 3 specific species, and Bob will basically act as my shipper. And, he'll get his appropriate cut. I'll sell fish to Bob cheaper than I would if I was doing them on my own, because I then don't have to take the time to do all the shipping work. So that saving me time and doing that is a convenience, and I'm willing to cut away some quote profit, which you don't really breed rainbows for profit, let's be fair, unless you're in Florida and have massive ponds. You don't breed rainbows for profit. It's just too slow a process. But to get some of those fish out there and available to the hobby more, it's probably what will happen is I'll be working through Bob to do kind of stuff like that. I talked about guppies with him a while back. He might his tune might change now that it's hard to get certain fish in. I'm not sure. It depends on when he reopens his shop. And like I said, like if I lived closer to Dan, I would just work with Dan, right? because I know Dan would just take whatever I handed him. Because Dan's the man. But for Bob, it's a matter of a couple of things that we've talked about to make sure it's both efficient for him and worthwhile for me. And then also just making sure in general that, like, I'm not wholesale depleting my brood stock in my tank so that I can keep that colony at a reasonable size and that I'm happy with my colony size and not just going like, oh, yeah, I must have sold fish. I have my big army of guppies went down to like 20 or whatever, right? And I got to wait forever to make it feel like a big colony again. I love having that huge colony, looking at it. And yeah, it's greedy, but they're my babies, so what do you do? So aquatic contest, let me answer that. And yeah, Dan, I heard your stream the other day talking about autos, and it sucks they're coming in so skinny. But yeah, so am I right that thinking autos are hard to breed and that's why they are hard to come by? Or are they from isolated spots in the wild? No, quite the opposite. Certain autos are actually easy to breed. The problem is they are in such prolific numbers in the wild, and it is so inexpensive to wild catch them and breed them in that it makes aquaculturing them really not worth it. It is hard to make it cost effective because we can get a common autosynclus for like $3 or $4, right? Relatively cheap, and that's our retail cost typically. Right now, to get them is going to probably be like $8 or some stupid nonsense. And some places that take a lot more time to medicate them and make sure they're healthy, you're going to pay a little bit more because you're going to pay for all that medicine and that time, right? Somebody like Dan, who spends a lot of time quarantining and making sure that all of his fish are in really good shape, you're going to pay more for that. But no, they're so prevalent, a lot like neon tetras. The thing is just neon tetras breed at a significantly higher rate. Autosynclus are, certain species are relatively easy to breed. The problem is they don't have very many fry at a time, and when you grow them out in ponds and stuff, the juveniles will eat the eggs of the babies, even though the parents will leave them alone. So you run this risk where your brood stock would have to keep moving around to reliably raise them up. You couldn't just like have these big ponds full of autos and reliably breed thousands of them, knowing that at a wholesale level you're going to sell them for like 75 cents to $1 a piece, right? You're just not breeding enough of them compared to how cheap it is to bring them in from the wild, where you could probably buy them from the wild at a wholesale level. So some, like a wholesaler that's going to be here in the United States, for example, is probably paying something like, shipping included, I want to note this, if you account this across all the fish they're bringing in, they're probably paying something like 25 to 30 cents a fish. And then they're selling them like $1 to $1.20, something like that. And that goes to your fish store, and then your fish store, in order to pay for the power and the cost of the employee and all that cost, they're probably selling a fish for $3 to $4, right? That's the typical kind of usual math and how fish works. Now, good places might charge you a little bit more, but again, because they're doing all that medication, they're making sure they're healthy. They're looking for like fish with sunken bellies, and they're not selling you one that's like gonna just die on you. It's worth those premiums. So that's what we're looking at. There's several fish that are like that, where it's so Siamese algae eaters are the same. Siamese algae eaters are actually kind of easy to breed, but they're so prevalent in the wild that it's just so cheap to bring them in wild caught. Yes, so you have to have a license to import fish. And if you are going to sell fish in mass, most states require some level. I know that in Washington State, there is a different business license I have to pay for in order to sell fish as a business. Now, as a hobbyist, I can sell fish to a store, and there's kind of a legal loophole there, because you can do it in various ways, whether it's like store credit or what have you. But as a hobbyist, you typically don't require one of those licenses. However, if you have an import license, you usually have all the licensing you need. in order to therefore sell fish. The person who could actually better answer that is Dance Fish, because he sells fish for his living, and usually it's a yearly. Most of those are a yearly cost, and I like the import license. I think lasts a couple years, but it's quite a bit more expensive. It might be yearly, but I think like the import license is something like every 5 years. I know that Dean has one, and I don't think he has to update it yearly. I think he gets to update it every certain number of years, and they last for a certain amount of time, but they're kind of expensive. So he just makes sure that like any importing he's going to do is all done in one shot. And he's done some import orders for like our club before, because they'll bring in stuff from other hobbyists in Canada, and they'll need the import license in order to legally do that. Stuff like that. Hope that answers a lot of that stuff. Closed the fish session because they were paying a license but was unable to sell fish. Oh man, it's an import. All right, it's an annual update. All right, there you go. There's the answer from the man himself. That's weird. Were they trying to import stuff they weren't legally supposed to? Like, that would be my question. I don't know. So let's we're toward the end of the stream, and lately I have been doing like some story time stuff at the end of every stream. I'm trying to think if there's a really applicable one right now, because the world is just effing weird. I also want to make sure I didn't miss anything in chat, because I want to get all those answers out there. Okay, we're looking pretty good. So let's see. I want to give like some little lesson, I suppose. Other than I got a plant to flower that I've never flowered before. So good on me, right? A stem plant, a species of Persicaria that I got to flower recently. And I was very surprised about what its flowers look like, because I didn't even look up what the flowers look like. I was just letting nature do its thing, and it's starting to properly bloom, and it's much different than I would have expected, and it's kind of cool. So once it fully blooms, I'll have some pictures of that probably on my Instagram. So one thing that let me talk to you about like a grand plan, like an illusion of grandeur, so to speak. And that is, whenever I can do my garage as a fish room. Okay? So my garage is 540 square foot. It's just a little bit larger than the typical two-car garage, which is somewhere between 400 and 440 in the United States. That much space, there's like a small area I have to leave open because that's where my water heater and furnace for my house are. And then there's another area around my circuit breaker panel for the electricity in my house. And those areas have to stay open and available in case they need to be repaired, work done, etc. The rest of that area gets to be all fish stuff. So one of my illusion of grandeur, so to speak, as I like to call it, ideas was to do instead of like growing out plants in a lot of tanks that also house fish. I mean, I will have plants in every tank, probably, just because plants are great. But I'll keep simpler plants in most of those tanks, and then have displays that have the more cool stuff. Yeah, no, I'm not covering my access. I'm not that crazy. I'm not Dean level crazy. So what I want to do instead is have like a miniature pond set up, but not like totes, because a lot of people, when they do ponds, they use totes. What I want to do is, if you've ever been to like some of those fish stores that have those like multi-tiered plant things that are made by Dutch aquarium systems, I don't want one of those in glass because they're heavy and they're obnoxious, and I think they're ugly the way that they're designed. Instead, what I want to do is possibly get a system built out of custom acrylic. And what it would be is like 4 foot by 4 foot tiered, so that you'd have this waterfall system very similar, but you can see everything clearly. There's no borders, no nothing. And do that as a giant plant farm. Now, in this, it would be noted that every plant lesson I would ever have from there on out would be based on that thing. I've thought about this for a long time because I have two kind of options. I can do this giant monstrosity thing, or I can do a large number of display tanks. And by large number, I mean each display tank will be 150 gallons. So 5 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot, custom built acrylic. It will take time because it's not cheap to build those. But I am at a luxury that my current job allows me to afford things like that over the process of a couple of months of tank. Which is why, partially why I can afford my garage, is that I'm slowly rat-holing money from my current job so that I can afford to, when the time is right, build it out. So the option becomes, and this is where the illusions of grandeur come in, because the illusion is I can fit all this stuff in there, but then I don't have breeding space, and that's not happening because I want to breed fish. I'm tired of not having room to like hatch rainbows out and watch baby rainbows grow up, because I love watching baby rainbows grow up. So I think if I did the math right when I did some measurements on my garage, I can fit 8 150-gallon display tanks. So back-to-back 4-piece. So I think that's 20 feet just in tank. That doesn't include spacing between the tanks and equipment and all that kind of stuff. And that's just a central row. So the end is like I've done some planning already to make this room, when it's done, very filmable, so that it can be done. YouTube can be really effective inside there, where it doesn't feel like weird and claustrophobic. Like you watch some of the folks that I love, and when they're trying to film their tanks, there's tons of glare. It feels like you're crushed on top of the tank, and it's like they're showing a 10-gallon. And these are channels that I like. I'm going to put that out there. And like the closest I think to a really roomy fish room that is not designed specifically for a business, because I think Dan's fish room is fantastic, and like the fish annex that he built is wonderful, but like Primetime Aquatics I think has a really great fish room. It is built in a way that is designed to be nice looking, functional, and still have a lot of tanks in it. Well, mine's like the opposite. Mine isn't about tank density so much. It's density in certain places. So like an entire wall of this garage will literally just be breeding fish. So it'll be my breeding groups and raising space. And I'll breed, literally probably only 4 species of fish at a time. But in huge numbers is the goal. So we're talking like, my goal would be to take 300 or 400 Bosemani whenever I'm going to sell, to have that many available. So that's going to be 9 months of work, because that's how Bosemani are. They're slow, they're rainbows. But you can mix some stuff into. So it's like 3-4 species of rainbows, and like probably a species or 2 of pleco, and the guppies will have their own stuff. Those are the illusions of grandeur I have. Or instead of that many display tanks, I can have this crazy tiered plant system, because that'll take up as much space as basically 2 of the tanks on each side. So I'd have 4 display tanks, and then this big crazy waterfall system plant display. These are the things in my head, so that you guys know. Problem is, it'll take until a hopeful statement would be the end of this year. That's a hopeful statement. The finances line up for that, but it's all the stuff with Human Malware making it possible to like get things moving, get that garage emptied, and then get a contractor in to do the work. Because I am not handy at all. I am not a builder in any way, shape, or form. I am definitely a tech-centered person. But yeah, so, and that's the thing, like, I want you guys to imagine being able to see basically multiple grow-out tanks where there's literal hundreds of rainbows in them. Because now we're not talking little, we're talking a couple. So like the way that I've designed it in my head is for the most part I'll be using 20 gallons and 40 breeders. Those are the two tanks that I like. I love 20 longs more, but they're not space efficient compared to the regular 20 gallon. So 40 breeders work as raising space once they hit a certain size. So once you get to like an inch, you move them out of a 20 gallon and into 40 breeders and let them grow out from there. And you just need good filtration and water changes. So it's an automatic water change system, all that kind of nonsense. But once they hit a certain size from there, you can start looking at things like a 300 gallon tote pond or something like that to store large number of rainbows in. The only thing that I wouldn't be able to do if I go any of these routes is one massive tank, because I won't have the space. Because the other thing I thought about is just doing like one 480 gallon tank as a display. But I think I'd rather have like between 4 and 8 150 gallon displays than like one jumbo display tank. Because it lets me do a little bit more, show off more species of fish. And play with more plants. Stuff like that. You know, just like have more plants on display, done nicely. And one of the things that I really want to do, because this is the end of the story time, how Bentley's crazy brain works, is for some of those display tanks, I want to get certain people to come in to design part of their aquascape. So an example would be someone like Joel Corvus-Oskin coming in and, all right, here's 150 gallon tank. Here's the plants I plan to use in them. How do you want to scape it? And then knowing that rainbows are going to go in there, so we can't go too crazy with like little sticks and stuff. But that's kind of like how my head is at. Although with guppies you could have lots of stuff. Yeah, Corey will never do rainbows in the 800 gallon. He's gone into some realm of different fish, and whatever he's planning on putting in there next, I don't know what it is, but yeah. One of those things. That's how Corey operates. Corey just does what he wants. I also don't like, how to put this, I hate the dimensions of his 800 gallon. I know it was done that way because it's what's most feasible and what he initially planned to put in it. It's the right dimensions for that. But for a like planted rainbow tank, that thing's a nightmare. I would never want to be working in that unless it was like just crypts and certain other things. But yeah, so those are some insights into my long-term plans of what I plan to do. Not quite as cool as like, someone who's got like say the fish annex like Dan, which I definitely won't ever do a fish annex because I'm not. Keep in mind the fish annex is designed specifically as a part of Dan's business, right? Oh God, no one would ever want to see Scuba Bentley. That'd be horrible. That's what Jimmy's for. Just bring Jimmy back, make him do that stuff. Which Jimmy is coming back, which is gonna be great. But yeah, so those are things in my head. Be prepared. Eventually, they're gonna happen. It's gonna take time because human malware is the worst. But and I also like I don't have some hoard of cash lying around. I gotta slowly save my money away and be able to afford the things. And contractors aren't cheap, but it'll get done. And when it's done, it'll be cool. And more importantly, it'll get filmed. Really, really well filmed. So that being said, guys, thank you so much for showing up to the live stream. We've clocked into our 2 hours at this point. And yeah, I'm gonna try and get you some updates as soon as I can. Be looking for, there's a small horde of videos coming out. There's the Brightwater Media, some of the Brightwell stuff is coming in here soon, and then of course the JCMP Lite is going to have its kind of final review here very soon as well. And there's a couple other things on the horizon that I'm planning to, that are I'm working toward, that'll be coming out just as general videos for the channel. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. We're gonna wait for the live part. Just trying to do this thing. Why wait? Because the timing is so weird on YouTube.